Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be talking about how to improvise. Improvisation is a very broad topic and it's something that people don't really know how to do because it's so broad. You can improvise in any way that you like, and it can seem overwhelming with not knowing what to do when you can literally do anything. I think it's important to know all of the rules in order to then break them. I'm sure there's a famous quote there somewhere. So I'm going to break improvisation down into 4 different things, and that is scales, chords, music theory and listening. So firstly, scales. Now I have done a video on scales before, so if you want to go into more depth on what scales are and how they work, then be sure to check out that video here. You do need to have a good understanding of scales in order to improvise, because this will tell you what notes you're going to be using when you're improvising. There are lots of different types of scales and they do have different kind of sounds. So there are major scales, which are just normal scales. Then there are minor scales, which sound slightly darker. There are blues scales, which sound, well, bluesy. There are also things called modal scales, which each have a unique different sound world. And a modal scale is just kind of offsetting the scale. So an example of this would be C major is the notes C, D, E, F, G, A and B. So it's just all of the white notes on the piano. If you were to play a Dorian scale, which is a modal scale, then this would be D, E, F, G, A, B, C, which is the same as C major, but it's just offset by one note. Modes can be quite confusing and you definitely don't need to know these in order to improvise, but I thought I would include these in the video so that you know that they're there and they are used for different qualities of sound. However, for this video we'll concentrate on C major, which is just the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B and C. Once you have a good understanding of scales, mostly from watching my video, then it's important to understand chords. Now I have also done a video on chords, so you can also go and watch that here if you want to, and that gives you a more in-depth view of how to construct chords, what chords are and how they're used. However, a quick rundown of some simple chords. So you can construct a triad chord by using note 1, 3 and 5 of a scale, and you can start one of these triad chords on each note of the scale. So in C you can have a C chord, which is C, E and G. You can have a D chord, which is D, F and A. You can have an E chord, which is E, G, B. One that starts on F, one that starts on G, A and B. This is the best place to start with improvisation, and once you've got really used to these chords in the scale, then you can move these around the piano, or you can reorder the notes to create a particular effect. You can also add notes to these chords. For example, a 9th chord would be the normal chord with the 9th note above the original note, which for a C chord would be an added D. Once you have scales and chords, then it's important to understand how to use these, and you can do that using music theory. Learning some music theory is perhaps the most advantageous thing you can do, because it will help you have expectations about what certain chords do or how they operate. And once you know this, when you're trying to create a particular effect, you can use certain chords to do that. An example of this would be something called a cadence. There are 4 different types of cadences, but I will give you the 2 main ones. And a cadence is essentially how you end a phrase or a song. So the first one of these is a perfect cadence, and this is essentially just a musical full stop. And that is chord number 5, which in the key of C is a G, to chord number 1, which is C. So that's a G chord to a C chord. And this should help you end a phrase. This should sound like it's finished. The opposite of this is something called an imperfect cadence, and this is more like a musical comma. So this would be chord 1 to chord 5, which is a C chord to a G chord. And this sounds like you're halfway through a phrase, or it just sounds unfinished. Cadences and music theory are a big topic, and there is so much you can go into just understanding how things work or how we perceive things in music based on expectation. And this will give you a big catalogue of things that you can work with in your improvisations. It will help you understand how you're playing, what you're playing, and why you're playing it like that. Once you've got scales, chords, and music theory, then it's time to put it into practice and start listening to your own playing. As I said at the beginning of this video, once you know the rules, you can then break them. And this is where you start to develop your own style. If you start playing some of these ideas and you like or don't like the sound, you can change it or keep it the same, and you can move it around the piano depending on what you want to do. Improvisation isn't a fixed thing. You can do whatever you want on the piano. And oftentimes these rules that you find, they might sound a bit cliche or overdone, and that's where you can start adding variations to them or adding different notes. Having said this, how you use these 4 elements, so scales, chords, music theory and listening, can vary the genre or style that you're playing in. So I will give you a few examples of what you might expect to see in certain genres. So the first one is pop. Now this mostly uses major and minor scales. Major if you want it to be a happier or lively pop song, or if you want it to be darker or sad, then you would use a minor scale. Pop songs are quite repetitive. You often see 4 chords and they are repeated lots of times, and you have something in the melody called a hook, and this is just a repeated melody. Chord number 1 is usually the first chord in the scale, so in C that would be a C chord, and chord number 4 is often chord 5, not always. So you only have the 2 middle chords to play around with, and then on top of that you can write a melody using the scale. Jazz music uses a lot of 7th, 9th, 11th and 13th chords, and this is just adding those notes on top of the original chords. You often find a lot of blues scales and modal scales to make it a bit more ambiguous. It also has a lot of solos which use these scales, so you can use chords in the left hand, these jazzier chords with 7ths and 9ths, and then improvise in the right hand using the blues scale, for example. Film music uses major and minor scales, and sometimes it uses modal scales as well to create a particular effect. They also tend to have repetitive themes, but they're used throughout the film in various different ways to reflect what's happening on screen. Also, because it's following a narrative, you'll often find lots of changes in mood in the music, and that will require different things. So it might change from major to minor very fast, or it might change from high on the piano to low on the piano very fast, but you can play around with this idea. And finally, classical music uses a lot of minor and major scales. It's very rules based, and it requires much more theory knowledge. On top of this, there is also clear structures. So for example, you might have an A-B-A structure, which is where you have one theme, then a different theme, and then it returns to the first theme. Classical music is usually not the one that you would go to in order to improvise. However, it's good to know what happens in classical music, because then you can use this in your improvisation. If you have any experience with improvisation and have anything to add, or you are struggling with your improvisation, then let me know in the comments. And if you want to book a lesson with me, you can do that using the link in the description. And before you go to this video, be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.